Okay, hello. Welcome everybody here to this new global talk we have with our colleagues by MIT in Boston. I'm Francesco Calza. I'm just the duty to introduce this new global expert talk that we have at Partenope University. We had three of that in the past that were at least successful dealing with the different subject. Today, our global talk will be about the future of social entrepreneurship. This is a special program that Partenope University has produced jointly with the MIT Sloan School of Management, and it is part of an important alliance that we have with our colleagues from Boston. That it is part of the MIT Global program, inside which we have this special program and also a part of a common and joint master that we offer to international students. The topic, as I told you, is the future of social entrepreneurship, and we have the honor to have as guest Susan Neal. She's the director of the operation. She's the director of operation at the Martin Trust Center of MIT Entrepreneurship Center, and she's of course as well lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. She's commonly known as the MIT Trust Center. She's leading entrepreneurship and innovation hub located in Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, and we are sure that she will introduce us in the best way this theme that is very particular because it is dealing with a particular aspect of entrepreneurship, that is social entrepreneurship, that is mainly here in Europe something that is emerging as subject, while I know that in USA it has an old history. She's as well an entrepreneur, and she is also a senior executive for over 20 years of experience in e-commerce, digital marketing, technology, and product development. She's prior to Atacama, that is an important network in this field. Of course, she's a very well-known speaker and leader in this subject, and she will also her particular lecture as well that she will introduce as well in few minutes. Some few words about this program, that is the Global Talk, that is our fourth occasion to meet our colleagues and to diffuse these themes through our community, Italian and not only Italian community. Who is listening to us is, of course, a community of students, of course, PhDs and master students, colleagues, and also practitioners that are interested in that. In Italy, we are trying to develop this theme using private investors in public sectors, because very often this field is managed by state actors. So it is, a borderline theme and borderline actors. We are mixing public state actors and private actors in order to give the right content to a very specific subject. As a matter of fact, even our university, Partenope University, and particularly our department, is trying to develop this theme also technically and practically, using the solutions that are on the border between state and private. And even though it is different to understand for those who are from US and from mainly English assessments, in many European states, this is a very difficult situation because state is state and private is private. So social is something that is in the middle. And I wait for your lecture, Susan, in order also to understand how we can develop that by ourselves. So welcome to you and to your host in order to listen a very interesting lecture, and I give you the floor. Thank you very much. Just a minute to say and to precise how the work will do. Susan will have with her co-speaker 40 minutes to have her lecture and her host lecture, of course. Then we have 30 minutes of Q&A from Partenope faculty colleagues. And then we have at the end 10 minutes of Q&A by the actors that are listening to us, that are from the floors. And then let me have 5 minutes of conclusion and summary at the end of this story. Thanks a lot again for having you here and your colleague too. And thank to all of you that are listening to us. Thanks, Susan, and please.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I believe it's, I think I heard around 4 o'clock there. It's morning time here. I'm here with Milan, and we're here at MIT at the Martin Trust Center. And we're excited to share with you some of what we do in terms of social entrepreneurship here at MIT, and for Milan to talk to you about his experience. And I have a PowerPoint. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do today, I was introduced, Susan Neal. I work here at the Martin Trust Center. What I thought might be helpful is, first of all, just to talk initially about the Martin Trust Center. And so for any of you who are not familiar with it, who haven't been to our campus, the Martin Trust Center for Entrepreneurship has been around actually for about 30 years. It was because of the foresight of a professor at the time, Ed Roberts, who felt like entrepreneurship was something MIT should support. Entrepreneurship 30 years ago was not a thing. A lot of people thought he was crazy. This didn't belong in academia or at MIT. But needless to say, he pushed forward. So we started as an entrepreneurship center. And then in 2015, through a donation of Martin Trust, became the Martin Trust Center. We have what I would say, actually, let's see, can I move these slides? There we go. So maybe just to kick us off, because since Ed Roberts started this concept of an entrepreneurship at MIT, it has grown pretty extensively. And so I like to show this map because any of those, this is a picture of our campus, and any of those colored buildings actually indicate organizations, clubs, what have you, that support entrepreneurship here at MIT. And I have to say, on the left-hand side, that's a list. It's certainly not exhaustive. We have, and I'm going to talk you through some of this, we have a number of clubs, organizations, student groups that are all involved in entrepreneurship. Okay, so we're going to kick it off because we are here actually at the Martin Trust Center. We're in the conference room. And so as I mentioned, this site was actually built in 2015 through the help of Martin Trust. I have some pictures there so you can get a feel for it. I don't know if any of the students have ever been, have been to MIT, had a chance to visit us. But essentially about 7,000 square feet. We have a number of conference room, phone booths. We have our own kitchen with coffee. We use it, we're open 24/7. And so students can be here anytime during the day or at night. We're really here for the students to come in. These are students pursuing or thinking about entrepreneurship, for them to come in and spend time exploring their ideas, meeting with other students, and, and a lot of times meeting with some of us staff and some of us entrepreneurs in residence when they're looking for some advice. Okay, so to talk about our mission at the Martin Trust Center, what's important to note is that we do focus on innovation-driven entrepreneurship. And the idea there is, MIT being STEM focused with a lot of emphasis on science and math and technology. Our purpose is really to help with innovation within those areas and think about ways in which we can impact the world. And so I say that only because, not that we don't support all of our entrepreneurs across campus, but it really is trying to use some of the insights that are coming out of MIT and some of the innovation and getting that in and of itself out into the world where we think it'll have impact. And so that is certainly our focus. The other thing I would say that is unique to the Martin Trust Center is that we really think about entrepreneurship in terms of a mindset. So we talk a lot about this saying, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for life. And we truly believe this. So in terms of all of the classes and programs and events we run, we are always thinking about how are we teaching our students about entrepreneurship in a way that will be with them for the rest of their lives. And as you know, I mean, in terms of entrepreneurship, it's very often the case that someone might start a business or pursue an idea and then decide that's not going to work out and pivot into something else. And what we want to do and make sure we do is we're teaching them the skills so that they can apply them to whatever endeavor they end up pursuing. And so that's why we talk about entrepreneurship more so as a skill and as a mindset. Okay, so much like starting a business, we also focus on who our personas. And as I said, we service the entire MIT campus. And so that includes undergrad students, graduate students, postdocs, fellows. We actually have a program for faculty here at MIT where we're helping faculty when they're interested in pursuing entrepreneurship. So these, we very much think about our student personas, who they are. In this slide, I have the students right in the middle, and that's because we consider them our customer, much like if you were starting a business. And we're constantly thinking about all that we do and provide for our customer and innovating ourselves, right? We're constantly on the move and thinking about how do we bring our content and our teaching in different ways to the students across campus. And so just to mention these, and I'll talk a little more about them, but in how we support the students, I would say through academics or our classes, through our programs, events, alumni, and through just the community and organizations that work closely with our students. To kick us off and talk about academics, so we have a book called Disciplined Entrepreneurship, written by our managing director, Bill Aulette. He is fairly well known around, I would say, even around the world when it comes to entrepreneurship, particularly at universities. This book was published along with the workbook about 10 years ago. And we anticipate at this point it is used in well over 500 universities around the world. And Bill, I'll give you a little bit of inside info. Bill is actually working right now on updating the book, and later this year we're anticipating his 10-year anniversary will coming out with a new version. But very much the principles, the fundamentals will not change. This is the type of instruction that we have been doing for, like I said, over 10 years at this point. I also have on this slide just some of the organizations that support entrepreneurship here at MIT. And then as well, an initiative we started, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, really bringing our content to the online world. And particularly, did a lot there during COVID, but edX is our partner in terms of how some of our courses and instruction gets disseminated outside of the MIT campus. In terms of the classes, so this is basically our structure. When a student comes, again, regardless of, arrives on campus, regardless of where they are, which school at MIT, we talk about this way to think about instruction for entrepreneurship. So very much there are the kind of the introductory courses. And then depending on the entrepreneur and their interest, we kind of break it into these 4 buckets. We have the foundational skills where they're learning about strategy, about team building, about tactics. We have the functional skills, so where they're actually digging deeper or delving deeper into sales, into how to raise money for their startup. And then industry specific, so climate, for example, you see there, fintech. And then because it's important for us to make sure the students have hands-on experience, many of them will engage in one of our labs. And so this allows them to work at a startup or work in an organization that is entrepreneurial or doing something, going after an innovation or is entrepreneurial in nature. And so, what I can say is it relates to social. We absolutely offer some courses. They more so live in some of the other divisions or departments of MIT that are focused solely on social. We find social entrepreneurs throughout our entire curriculum because, as you can imagine, all of this is very relevant, regardless of whether you're building a socially focused business or a more traditional startup. And so, as I mentioned, we have a climate and energy ventures. I was just on the phone before this talk with the instructor there. It's huge course, lots of interest. And they're, as you might imagine, tackling some of the biggest problems as it relates to climate. Okay, I also mentioned that we have programs, and we see social entrepreneurs coming through our programs. Again, they're wanting to learn the basics, and then to the degree they have an idea, and many show up with their ideas and they're passionate, we're helping them move those ideas further along and think about how they actually develop. And so Start MIT is a program actually I teach in January, the month of January, when the students have a break. 3 weeks long, full-time, Monday through Friday. It's an amazing course. 150 students signed up last January. So a lot of interest in that. Fuse is another program where we're actually taking teams and helping them specifically with their business and just get to that next step. And then Delta V is our summer accelerator, and that's what we're running right now in our center. We have 23 teams. It's a highly competitive process to get chosen to participate in our accelerator. Milan, who you will be hearing from later, he actually participated in Delta V last year. But Delta V is really a program that, again, takes a team, an idea, and over the course of the summer, in 3 months, full time, really helps those students get to a point where they're ready to raise money or launch their businesses. So we can, if there's questions, we can talk about that. But we're funding these startups to help them in these early days. And we're providing them with a lot of mentorship. Okay, I think I mentioned we do a fair amount of events, and particularly because we have this space, which is great. I would say, we use our events to talk about either, issues that are trending or that folks want to hear more about. As you might imagine, particularly as it relates to social, climate is a hot topic. We just had a large symposium with some of our corporate partners back in April and brought in some amazing experts on climate and energy to talk about some of the work being done both here at MIT and around the country, and to encourage people to get involved, and some of the students, and give them ideas for how they can participate. So well-attended event, and with some pretty remarkable speakers. Okay, so in terms of our mentors and coaches, I would say this is another big benefit of the Martin Trust Center. And we have hundreds and thousands, actually, probably, of folks who have signed up in one way or another to help our students. And this is a characteristic, I think, of the MIT alumni that's awesome, is their willingness to give back. And so whether it be a social entrepreneurship endeavor or just a traditional startup, we do a lot of mentoring and coaching. These are some of the organizations we've worked with, and particularly we work with some of them as it relates to some of their social innovation. If they're looking for ways to develop sustainable packaging, for example, that was a project actually I worked on with a team in one of my classes last year. Okay, so that's who we are. To jump in and just talk about social entrepreneurship. And like I said, we're not solely focused on social entrepreneurship. We invite any type of entrepreneurship inquiries and folks into our center. But social entrepreneurship is sort of a category of its own, right? And I think in terms of what makes it different is particularly when you have a founder who is really driven and motivated by a social cause. And that is typically what we see, is someone who will come into our center or send us an email looking to set up a meeting, but really has this idea that they want to go after, and they're looking for the foundational skills, like, how do I approach this? How do I think about, this problem and a potential solution? And how do I build a team to go after it? How do I put together the foundations of a startup, of a company? And so, and because obviously there are a lot of issues out there that need to be addressed, we work closely with these individuals that come in. And I think, Milan will talk more about this because he's obviously firsthand, but it's to some degree, they have even additional challenges to a typical startup because they have this metric for social impact, right? So not only are they oftentimes trying to raise money to get the company off the ground, they also need to ensure that whatever they're going after, they're making a difference, right? And so whatever those KPIs end up being, it needs to be something that can be measured. And we see a lot of folks looking for real indications of their success if it is in a social endeavor. I like to, when I talk about social entrepreneurship, I always have to mention Patagonia. Just it tends to be a fairly well-known brand. I actually lived in California and worked with some folks from Patagonia. Amazing company, outdoor company, if you haven't heard of them, particularly as they relate to social entrepreneurship. I would check them out. They do so much and have a great product, but have figured out a way to give back and to really think about our planet and what they can do to help there. Okay, so as I said, here at the Martin Trust Center, we work with social entrepreneurs, but even in a broader sense. So when I was thinking about this talk today, what maybe would be beneficial to understand is here at MIT, the way we are organized, and particularly around social entrepreneurship, how we support that endeavor. And so what I have here on this slide on the left-hand side are those specific organizations here at MIT that are focused on social entrepreneurship. So the MIT Legatum Group, which we were just talking about, Milan was actually a fellow at Legatum. It is a group here on campus that is focused, like I said, solely on working with students who are looking at making an impact, in many cases, in developing or emerging countries. And they provide funding and grants and travel accommodations to help these students get into some of these communities to really understand the problems and really work on solutions. So that's Legatum. I would say PKG, which is the Priscilla King Gray Association or group that's here on campus as well. Again, supporting just social endeavors. And so PKG actually even offers specific classes related to social entrepreneurship. They are providing grants and fellows. They're really encouraging students to get out there and do work in the public sector and work with companies and governments in terms of making a difference as it relates to social and environmental issues. And then the last one I'll mention there is Solve, a fairly new organization, started in 2015. And this was started by the president of MIT at the time. And the idea is really, how do we use technology and partner with other universities in using some of our technologies and sciences to solve social issues. So those are three of just, and I'm sure there are others, MIT is a big place, but these are the three that we interact with fairly often with these social entrepreneurs. And the right side, so you see our logo, because again, we support these social entrepreneurship, although it's not all we do. Design X is in our architecture school, design and architecture school. It's a program that helps folks design products that, again, can be used, for whatever purposes, but they get a fair number of social entrepreneurs going through their program, again, as they look for solutions to some of the major problems. And then Sandbox I have there because from a funding perspective, Sandbox is our organization that supports students across campus in providing early funding, and sometimes it's just $1,000 or $5,000. But, it gets some of these companies off the ground and get the students just the ability to move forward and maybe to use some money to explore their idea. And so just because I love to talk about what some of the work that we're seeing coming out of MIT, this is a company that I actually interviewed, I would say about 6 months ago. It's a gentleman named Joshua. He graduated from MIT Sloan in 2020. He has created this company called Gria, which is helping bring produce organically grown in Africa to the US. And you should visit his site, a wonderful gentleman working with these farmers in Africa and getting their product here to the US and spreading the word about how it's helping some of these small farmers back home. So that's one company. And the other one that actually went through our Delta V program in 2018 called Moving Health. We love this company. And they actually, so like I said, these entrepreneurs move throughout a lot of times the entire MIT ecosystem. So they went through our accelerator in 2018. These ambulances, motorcycle ambulances that you see there actually was a result of some work the social entrepreneur did as part of the Design X that I just mentioned. This is an individual who is, I believe it's Ghana, and working with how to transport, particularly started with just pregnant women to hospitals when they were in need of some medical attention. And now they are starting to spread their operation and work with in rural areas and just getting sick people or that need medical help. How do they get them transported in an efficient way? So again, this is just two examples of companies that have come through our programs here at MIT. Okay, and so with that, we actually are really fortunate to have Milan here. As I said, he went through Delta V. He was part of my pod, so I know Milan very well. And he's here to talk to you specifically about his company, Congo Clothing. And so in introducing Milan, I want you to know he's the co-founder and the CEO of this company. It's a fashion brand that supports survivors of sexual violence in his native Democratic Republic of Congo. So prior to this venture, he founded another company called Eben, a skincare company, and Flashstay, a property tech company. He has also relevant experience in public policy in the French government, DNC, and Wall Street. He worked for Citibank. He has an economics degree from the University of Miami and a master's in political science from MIT. So with that, I'm going to actually move my computer over to Milan so that he can take you through his slides and tell you more about his business.
Awesome. Thank you, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. So as Suzanne mentioned, my name is Milan. I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I'm the co-founder of Congo Clothing Company. So before I get started, a little word on our logo, which sort of explains what we're doing. So the idea of Congo Clothing Company is to really use fashion as a vehicle for good and to merge different cultures. So the two bars that you're seeing are essentially illustrative of our more Western linear aesthetic, and the zigzags in the middle are more representative of African asymmetrical, more geometrical aesthetic. And so the merging of the two creates this brand that we hope is modern, but at the same time is grounded in tradition. And our slogan is "Impact never looks so good," and you'll hopefully understand why throughout the presentation. So as Susan mentioned, social entrepreneurship is really defined by this need from an individual or a group of individuals to solve a specific problem. In the case of Congo Clothing Company, the specific problem that we're trying to solve is the fact that 48 women are raped every single hour in my country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is a statistic from 2018 from the American Journal of Public Health. And so you might ask why. And so this is why I have this, slide here where you see that Congo happens to be the largest producer of many natural resources that are critical to the so-called energy transition. We're the largest cobalt producer in the world. For those of you who don't know cobalt, it is the key raw material that's used in manufacturing of batteries. So to put it very simply, there's no Tesla or there's no electric vehicle revolution possible without Congo. Congo is also the largest supplier of coltan. We have about 80% of the global supply, and that's a rare earth mineral that's used in laptops, cell phones, and all types of electronics, and we supply about 80% of that. So the reason I'm listing all of these critical minerals is because as a result of this vast endowment in natural resources, there's a lot of pressure in communities where these minerals are found, and rebels, militia groups have resorted to using rape as a psychological warfare tactic to displace populations and exploit these resources, which leads to the problem that we're addressing of 48 women being raped every single hour in the country. And the way we're trying to solve this problem is through using fashion. Our value proposition, plain and simply, is look good and do good. We believe fashion is an interesting vehicle because it transcends border. The one thing that might unite us here in Boston and in Italy is we might be wearing the same Nike sneakers, or like some of us might, like my case, like Inter Milan, and like wearing the Nerazzurri jersey. So fashion is a way of us expressing ourselves, and we thought that it would be interesting to, one, use it to raise awareness about the issue of rape in war in a subtle manner, and two, provide survivors with economic opportunities. So here's how we do this. On the left side, this is our direct-to-consumer offering. So we're heavily tapping into the demand for conscious products. It's probably the same thing in Europe, but in the United States and on this side of the Atlantic, there's a growing demand for purpose-driven products. Consumers want brands that represent their values. And if you look at millennials in the United States, their average spend is about $2,000 a year on clothing. And increasingly, they demand that these clothes represent either their environmental aspirations or their social aspirations. And so we're tapping into that opportunity. On the right side, this is our B2B enterprise proposition. About $185,000 is spent yearly by corporations on apparel and merchandising. I'm myself wearing a hoodie from the MIT Sloan Africa Business Club that we at Congo Clothing Company manufactured, and we allowed them to be impactful, but we also allowed them to be made aware of the issue that you're trying to solve. And so this is the hybrid model that we're currently using. On the ground, we're partnering with a strong impact partner, the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Dr. Denis Mukwege, and his hospital. And this is a little overview on the left of our framework. So it's loosely called the 3C method. The first C stands for communication. So as I said before, we use fashion as a way to communicate the issue. The second C stands for capacity. Our resources, part of the money that we generate is used towards upskilling and training women on the ground in the Congo through our partner. They actually operationalize our workshops. And then the third C stands for continuity. What happens after our intervention once they leave the hospital and our training facilities? Do they indeed have better outcomes in their life? And so if I walk you through it step by step, we communicate through clothing. People purchase our merchandising or our clothes. That allows us to get resources that we then funnel to our partner organization on the ground. We run 180 days training programs where we're currently teaching women sewing and graphic design. After the program, they build capacity, and then they're able to have their own creative output that they can sell. We also buy some of these output and provide them with a licensing fee. So what we're seeing in terms of impact on the ground is naturally income goes up, but also violence goes down, because a woman with more income means that all of a sudden kids can go to school, so they can avoid being out and idle and essentially going to join rebel groups and perpetuating violence. And as a result of this, we're seeing more people in the community demanding skills, and that creates a positive virtuous effect. To the right, you're seeing an application that we're building. We've realized that there's no shortage of creative outputs, but there's no innovative way for these women to document it. And so this is where technology comes into play. So we're developing this application that would allow the women we work with to very simply take a picture of their patterns, of their graphic work, of their artwork, provide some basic data about the creative assets. And on the back end of the platform, we'll be able to purchase it and render that on some of these t-shirts or hoodies or any apparel that we sell. And then in return, the women are paid a fee, and they can also invite their friends, and that diffuses income in the community. And to the right side, you're seeing a statistics from the International Monetary Fund that validates our efforts, because it says here that an 8% increase in economic activity can reduce violence against women by a full 1%. In terms of our model on the direct-to-consumer side, Susan was talking about the necessity for social entrepreneurs to not only focus on their traditional financial KPIs, but also focus on social governance KPIs. So in our case, we developed a very easy system for not only us, but for the customer to understand what they're contributing to the world by engaging and purchasing Congo Clothing Company. So on the direct-to-consumer side, we have 4 categories of products. We have jackets, pants, t-shirts, and accessories. And the system that we came up with actually during Delta V, with the support of Susan and some of the entrepreneurs in residence here, is to calculate impact by assigning a specific number of training days, which is, as you saw in the previous slide, what we're providing to each category of product. So if you're buying a jacket as a consumer, you know that you're providing 50 days of training to a woman. If you're buying a pant, you know that your contribution is 30 days, and so on and so forth. It allows you as the customer to understand the positive value that you have in the world. And I'll show you on the next slide how we're planning to gamify this. But before, a couple words on our target personas and the markets we're going after. So currently we're incorporated in the United States, and we're focusing our efforts on coastal cities where we're seeing that people typically age 25 to 35 resonates the best with our offering. These people tend to be highly educated, they're well-traveled, and they really value purchasing conscious products. That's not to say that, like people outside of this age range are not, people would focusing, but again, it's very important, especially in the early stage, to have a very defined market that you can attack and conquer. And this is what we're doing by really focusing our effort on these demographies and these geographies. Going back to the impacts and the way we keep consumers engaged, this is another product that we're building, leveraging technology. So as I mentioned, when you're purchasing Congo Clothing Company, you know exactly the number of days of training that you're providing. And so this is an ecosystem dashboard that we're building that essentially gamifies your generosity, if you will. So here's Sylvia. She's an actual customer from Chicago. Currently on the left side on the leaderboard, she sees that she's our 4th most impactful customer. If she's competitive, maybe that will lead her to like purchase more so she can reach the top number. She's historically provided 360 days of training. That has contributed to providing sewing machines, but also she can see on the right hand of the platform, the workshop that she's actually supporting. So this not only builds transparency, but it also creates stickiness. And as people are aware of the good they're doing in the world, our hypothesis is they'll be encouraged to do more, therefore helping scale the brand. We're also very big on community. So you can see in the middle here that there's some upcoming events. So Sylvia can have access to those ahead of time by clicking and claiming her passes. And so we're not only building a brand, but we really like to stress the fact that we're building a global community centered around, again, this concept of look good, but doing good. On the B2B side, we've built a very powerful offering for enterprises. During my time at MIT, we've realized that organizations spend millions of dollars purchasing t-shirts, tote bags, hoodies, and so on and so forth. And so the question for us was really, how can we find a way to tap into these resources and incentivizing these companies to purchase the same set of products, but from like a fashion company that was actually doing good in the world, as opposed to buying from operators that are more commoditized in nature. And so thankfully, with the support of the school, we got our first set of customers here. The Legatum Center that Susan mentioned was one of our initial customers. We supply a range of products as well for the Martin Trust centers. We're actually in the process of producing some tote bags for them. And what you're seeing with the organization offering, speaking about the business model, is that it allows us to very effectively target a wide range of people, and that creates brand awareness that then translates into benefits for the direct-to-consumer brand. So this is the little flywheel that you have here, and that helps us, like really stay financially in a good position. This is a little case study of a company we worked with. They're based in Miami. It's called Honeyquote. It's an insurance tech company. And on the left side, you're seeing our value proposition. So number one is really elevating the brand. So communicate the company's offering in a fun and simple way. One thing that's really interesting with Congo Clothing Company is because we're designers, we allow companies to collaborate with us and create assets, creative assets that are truly reflective of their brand. So instead of going on a website where your only option is to put a logo on the heart and moving left and right, we work with you to like really come up with something that really represents your company. So you can see here on the right, Honeyquote wanted some buildings and palm trees that represented Miami. They wanted something that's sunny. And so we really worked with them to communicate that idea. And we therefore elevated their brand. They also wanted something that was stylish and that was premium. Oftentimes, providers of swag are not so focused on style, fit, and quality. And this is another value proposition that we offer. And then finally, the ability also to do good in the world. So again, the same way we communicate impact for direct to consumers, That's the way we communicated for enterprise. So in the case of this order, it was a pretty small order, but we know that Honeyquote contributed 44 days of training to survivors in the DRC. And as of last week, they actually placed a second order. And so their impact is only scaling. And this is good because not only they feel good about themselves for being a corporate responsible actor, but it also encourages their employee, and they have the satisfaction of working with an employer that is set on really pushing the world in a positive direction. In terms of our competitive advantage, we like to compare ourselves to traditional fashion companies. There's Patagonia here, and I know Susan likes us better than Patagonia. And we have companies like the North Face, but then we also have these traditional swag or merchandising providers like Custom Ink or Foreign Print. And so when you think about, to start with traditional fashion brands like Patagonia, one thing that sets us apart is really technology, because we're providing this design as a service value proposition. And the way we can scale that and do it for many companies at the same time is we're leveraging artificial intelligence in our design workflow. So that gives us the abilities to take a lot of inputs from many different companies and very quickly send them mock-ups. So it's a direct improvement to our bottom line. The other advantage that we have over companies like Patagonia and the North Face is our impact is directly quantifiable. Patagonia is a great company, billion-dollar company, but loosely that like they're helping the environment. When you buy a sweater from Patagonia, you don't exactly know how they're going to do that. It's not clear, but they've achieved such a large scale that we just trust them. In the case of Congo Clothing Company, we're not asking you to trust us. That you're contributed a specific amount of days of training, and we think that in a world where people want to know exactly the impact they're having, that sets us apart from competition. In terms of our advantage against companies like Custom Ink or Foreign Print that are very famous providers of enterprise merch here in the United States, well, we have a brand identity, which they don't have. They're largely commoditized. We provide social impact. We quantify the impact, and we also have this customization as a service feature. And our quality is way superior. And this is where we're benefiting directly from having a premium direct-to-consumer brand, because with us, we're sending a signal that the swag you're going to have, the merchandising you're buying is of great quality. And we also have this community building dimensions that some of these companies don't have. In terms of our traction, so we're an MIT incubated company. Last year, I was finishing my master's in political science, but we managed to get the business off the ground and get some revenue. So we generated $53,000 in revenue. We have formidable average gross margins at 75%. We always like to joke that we have the margins of a software company, but without the expenses of all these engineers. So with very lean and financially sound business model. Last year, we supported over 60 survivors. This year, we're on track to support over 500. We have a 25% online repeat rate, and we have a 26% direct conversion rate when we do events. And in terms of our enterprise offering, almost 1 out of 2 companies we meet with for a design meeting ends up purchasing something from us. So a very high conversion rate there on the enterprise side. And at the bottom, you see some sample of companies we worked with. So Legatum, Catalan.ai, that was a company that was in my cohort last year during Delta V, Harvard Business School, Solve, which Suzanne mentioned. We're doing a big deal with HubSpot, which is a big company here in Cambridge. And so we're really scaling our offering. The team, so I'm joined by incredible individuals. So Andrea, my co-founder, takes care of our supply chain as well as of our product design. Ridvik is our tech lead. So all these fancy, innovative tech tools that you're seeing, Ridvik is the lead on that. So he's a machine learning engineer here at MIT. And we're also supported by an amazing advisory board. Some of these people, we met them through the MIT ecosystem. You can see here that Professor Charlie Fines, who's a professor of supply chain here at the Sloan School, is on our board, providing us advice on inventory management and how to keep, like a lean logistics operation. And finally, our partner, Dr. Denis Mukwege, who's a 2018 Nobel Peace Prize winner, and who got worldwide recognition for his fight helping survivors of sexual violence. We work hand in hand with them. So yeah, that's our company. You can scan the QR code that will take you straight to our website, and our contact information are below.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Susan, for your very effective presentation, and thank you also to Milan. I was very interested in your presentation, in your passion in presentation. It was very interesting for me, the idea you have of measuring the value, the social value, and the impact. That is very innovative. And now let me give the floor to our colleagues, our faculty colleagues, for Q&A. If we have some, please. I think that Michele, the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you again for this really interesting and inspiring talk on a topic that I'm very passionate about, but I think all of us, we are very passionate about. One issue we are looking at is the idea whether a social startup is something different from other types of startup, or if we can consider social startup as something you can deal with as our usual startups. So my question is for both of you, for Susan and for Milan. And for Susan, especially to try to understand whether you adapt your approach as a Trust in March Center when you deal with the social startup, or if you think that the mindset is the same, you can use the same tools, the same approach. And for Milan, the idea is whether a social entrepreneur, a social startup requires different skills, different capabilities in your mind, or if to be a social startupper, it's something that is almost the same of being, for example, a high-tech startup in a different field. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll kick us off, and I would say, so in terms of the similarities versus dissimilarities, so I would say there are some fundamental things about a startup, a traditional startup versus a social startup that are across the board similar, right? When you're starting a company, the importance about thinking about what the problem is you're trying to solve, what a potential solution is that solution scalable, what kind of team are you putting together, how are you going to contact the users of your solution or the purchases of your solution. So, that is why in terms of what we do, we're able to help folks like Milan who came through our accelerator program, because a lot of those skills are fundamental. That being said, there definitely are differences. So for a traditional startup, for example, I think, as I mentioned, it's really, a lot of these businesses are trying to get a paying customer and focused on sort of the financial metrics, right? And the idea being, obviously, if they can create a solution or a product or service that someone's going to pay for and enable them to start a successful, profitable business, that they've achieved success. Now, what I would say with the social startup is you have that additional challenge of not only that financial success, because obviously you need funding to maintain your business, right, to pay your people, but you also have these social KPIs, and it's very much visible and I would say equally focused on in terms of whether or not you're meeting your goals and achieving your objectives. So I would say that's fundamentally, in my mind, the biggest difference. I would also say with social startups, there are typically more challenges as it relates to governments and regulatory issues. I mean, not all the time, but it certainly can have some of those challenges as well, more so than perhaps a traditional startup.
Thank you. I think in terms of your questions around are the skills difference? Is there a new set of skills? I think the most important and fundamental difference is the social entrepreneur needs to really start with a strong why. Why am I doing this? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Am I passionate about the problem? And I would say that is, like a fundamental difference. And then once you think about your why, another major difference in my view from my little experience is that traditionally, and I've been on the other side, started, for-profit exclusively companies. The focus there is on, shareholder returns and value. So you're just, making sure that there's a strong focus on maximizing return for your shareholder. I think here what I'm learning is that it's more a concept of stakeholder capitalism, where we're looking at the set of people that we're servicing. So not only our shareholders, but the communities we're involved in the Congo and the women we're helping, our partner, the hospital and the Nobel Peace Prize gentleman that I was mentioning earlier, but also the government. And our interaction with all of the stakeholders is really different, and we're trying to maximize value for a wider set of them. But fundamentally, because our ability to do good and deliver more impact on the ground hinges on our ability to generate revenue, because at the end of the day, we have a double bottom line, but the size of our bottom line is directly related to the size of our top line. So the same tactics and the same strategies and frameworks that apply to developing a successful for-profit enterprise, we use some of these same frameworks. And so there's complete alignment there. It's just that we're managing a wider set, I would say, of stakeholders.
Thank you.
Thanks, Milan. Well, what I can add to your arguments is that very often, and mainly in case of responsible consuming, the demand is growing faster and faster than the offer. That is what I can see very often in European and Italian market. But anyway, let me leave the floor to the other question. Marco, I think.
Yes, thank you. I very much enjoyed your both presentation. Actually, I have a question for both of you. I don't know who wants to answer. My curiosity goes back to what Susan was mentioning before, the funding issue. So my question regards more, how do venture capitalists generally perceive social startups? Is there any specific distinction on the way venture capitalists tend to approach traditional ventures compared to social ventures? Is this an issue or not? So the question is for both of you, because I've raised for you, Susan, on the more general side, but I think that Milan has the real problem in this moment. Probably, I don't know. I hope not. Thank you.
Yes, and so maybe I'll jump in quickly, but I think Milan can talk to you specifically about his experience. But yes, as you might imagine, we do see challenges, particularly with raising money from VCs. I mean, they're not that they're not out there, but it's very specific, the investors who are looking at social companies, social startups. And so it's finding those individuals and convincing them that, that this is a worthwhile pursuit. And, like I said, they're out there, they're just not as common as, more your traditional VCs or angels. That being said, there are other ways of raising money, which we typically work with our students, whether it's grants, is quite a bit of money. From a grant perspective, obviously some work involved in applying for those. You can do debt financing. You can, look just for private donations. So some of those tools and vehicles are what we consider a lot of times when we're looking at a social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that we're seeing some challenges in the traditional pursuit of traditional VCs, because the nature of VCs is, they're looking for these unicorns, right? So they're looking for these companies that are potentially going to get to that $1 billion valuation. And the perception, and, I emphasize the word perception here, is that a company that is focused on, social issues, is not necessarily fit, to get to this 1 billion mark. I mean, Patagonia is a clear example that that's not necessarily true, but at least there's like a wide perception that that is the case. And so in our case, we've really quickly realized that, you know, going after VCs, we're looking for companies that can return in a very small amount of time, 40x, 50x, was not necessarily the right thing. For a couple of reasons, because this idea of, you know, finding these unicorns also introduces the concept of that 5-year timeline. You know, VCs look at their, you know, funds in like 5-year horizon. And so, you know, this is not the case for all of them, but I'll just say they're breathing down your neck, you know, so that you can get to an exit by 5 years. If you're someone that's working, like in my case, with, you know, fragile communities, and we're patiently building, you know, like resources on the ground, I don't necessarily want, you know, like people to pressure me to get to a specific outcomes in 5 years. I might need more patient capital that is looking maybe at a 10-year, 15-year horizon. And so we found that there are a lot of players out there, whether they're impact funds, angels that have made a lot of money, but that now want to also have something in their portfolio that is doing good, family offices, grants. As Suzanne mentioned, you know, I became a professional grant writer. I feel like I spent a lot of my time, too much of my time, writing for grant applications, but there are definitely sources of funding out there that are not VC.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you.
Thank Marco too. And now Eva, please.
Yes. So first of all, thank you both for joining us. It was really inspiring, both presentations. I have a question for Milan. Once again, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. Now I understand why our students fell in love with your idea last year. So, you know, social entrepreneurship is finally becoming a more and more interesting area for businesses, and especially for younger generations of entrepreneurs. They are showing a greater sensibility towards this, towards impactful initiatives. So since I know that we have some aspiring social entrepreneurs in the audience, what advice would you give to them to, you know, develop, trying to make a meaningful impact, but also building a sustainable business model? So in other words, what is, according to your experience, the best way to manage the paradox between profit goals and social goals, if there is a paradox in your?
Yeah. So first, I'd like to say, you know, take my advice with a grain of salt, because I'm also trying to figure it out. You know, maybe in 10 years, once I become a unicorn, I'll say it with a lot more confidence. But I think what I can say now is, you know, be very careful of the distinction between, you know, idealism and pragmatism. I think that a lot of social entrepreneurs, one of their, you know, like natural characteristics from what I've seen is they tend to be idealists, and this is great, but there needs to be a very, very healthy dose of pragmatism. And, you know, very practically, that pragmatism needs to come in the form of a business plan or a business model that really makes sense. And I think that, you know, to me, at least, there's no paradox, because you can always find an alignment between maximizing revenue and, you know, also giving more. And like, you know, like in our case, as I said, we have a double bottom line, but our ability to give back is completely, you know, like in function with our ability to like generate more revenue. And in that sense, we have no other choice but to create a very sustainable business model that really drives, you know, like commercial outcomes. And so I would say, you know, making sure that your why, and, you know, ties in nicely with a business model that really makes sense is very, very important. And don't be too in love with your ideas. Ideas can evolve. So, you know, be open to, you know, like changing things, testing new things. In our case, you know, this whole apparel and merchandising vertical, which is now the fastest growing vertical in our business, came from our flexibility to, you know, like consider other business models. And now it's really fueling the growth of also our more traditional, but we're open to embracing new ideas. So yeah, flexibility, I'd say is the other big thing.
Okay, thank you, Eva. We have time for another two, but we have just 10 minutes, so please try to be faster. Michele again.
Yes, another issue that I think it's very nice that I heard from you, especially Milan, is the issue related to the scalability, because we had a lot of social startup in our main program, for example, that gave us a talk, and they were telling us that they struggle a little bit with this scalability issue, the idea of scaling up fast, especially because venture capital, they love very scalable business. But they told us you have to be careful, not losing your social purpose, trying to keep the storytelling alive. And if I well understood, you are starting using technology to scale, but also keep the social purpose alive in your enterprise without facing the risk, for example, of Patagonia, which is now very large, but as you told, sometimes you lose the idea that is a social-oriented firm. Can you elaborate a little bit on the scalability issue of a social startup, please?
Yeah, I think again that goes back to the business model. In our case, I think that there's no doubt that scale is actually good for the business, because for us, what does scale means? It means more revenue, more customers, and that directly translates into more money that we can use to fund our programs, and then the impact scale as well. And so technology in our case, is really helping us get more clients faster. And like in our value prop of providing design as a service, we can do a lot more design and then handle a lot more customers. On the impact side, technology also helps us provide more income to the women, because the idea of the application is for them to get a system through which they can get paid, and then essentially distribute this income in their communities. And so again, I would say that it's very important from the get-go to try and find a business model where these two are not at odds, to the best of people's ability. If time horizon is the main issue, that's fine. But nonetheless, I don't think that scaling and social enterprise are mutually exclusive. And most founders should really try and create from day one a business where they're hand in hand together. Because then I think you might as well start like an NGO if the business model doesn't scale, because then you'll always have to ask people money, and the purpose of starting a company is to be self-sufficient. And so really trying to find ways to not ask people for money.
No, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks again. And again, Marco.
Thank you. I will be very fast. No, everyone talks of ESG. ESG, we know it's the topic of the day. But how can government, organization, individuals support and foster the growth of social entrepreneurship? That it's one that by definition meets many of the ESG So how do you expect that governments, organization, and individual can strengthen and foster the support of social entrepreneurship?
I don't know if you have a perspective, but yes. So I think it's important. ESG is certainly a topic that is relevant and is talked about a lot, particularly as it relates to some government initiatives and certainly investment initiatives. The government, in terms of the government, it's interesting. As you know, governments move slow. And it can be challenging to put together these types of initiatives. We have seen examples of where programs, in fact, I can't think of the name of it, but in Chile, for example, we brought in some government folks to one of my classes, in fact, to talk about one of their social initiatives and as it relates to entrepreneurship. And the money that they were able to designate toward this initiative, and just the whole community support, in terms of businesses and academia, but really understanding the benefits of these programs where they were encouraging in less developed or challenged areas this concept of entrepreneurship and innovation and how to get these folks start thinking about how to smart in their own small way businesses and think like an entrepreneur. So that was one, example I would say here in Boston, there's a lot on the government's agenda. So we don't see, not that they aren't interested in entrepreneurship, and because it supports our Boston economy. So there's definitely some attention, but they leave it more, I think, to the academics and to the private sector in terms of a lot of the initiatives. I don't know if you have examples.
Yeah, I have some good examples actually. So in terms of ESG, one thing that's great in the United States is that it's now being mandated to, report on, the goods that you're doing or your ESG metrics. And so companies now are setting these, very aggressive KPIs. So for example, I know that Google on a yearly basis has to spend $1 billion with, social impact or diverse founders. That's $1 billion from one company. Governments can provide subsidies. Government can provide tax deductions. In many cases, actually work better than subsidies because that's money that's not actually given to you, but it's money that's just removed, from your taxation. So the incentives are a little better when it's not piloted by government offices. We're also seeing the importance of government in actually building the ecosystems and making sure that the social companies are getting the support that they need. So what we're doing, for instance, with the dashboard and the metrics that we created, it allows a company, for example, Sloan and MIT ordered this hoodie. They now have a number that they can add directly to their S in the ESG, meaning that, hey, in terms of social, here's what we did, right? We bought $1 million worth of, I hope one day they'll buy $1 million worth of Congo clothing, and we contributed X amount of days. So I think there are interesting mechanisms on both sides, but largely it comes down to the individuals and their companies to really drive the conversation on the topic. But definitely seeing a lot of good change here for sure.
Thank you again. Then we have the last question. Eva, please.
Yes. So my last question is for both of you, since you are since you're both embedded in an ecosystem which is at the forefront of innovation and change. So what do you see as emerging areas in the field of social entrepreneurship that you believe could have a significant impact in the near future, in the coming years?
Well, I can tell you one idea that I'm seeing and pretty excited about is, as you might imagine, we're hearing a lot about generative AI, particularly here at MIT. There is a lot of focus on it, and particularly in the entrepreneurial world. And as I am working with companies in our Delta V Accelerator program, I'm seeing very rapidly how some of this new technology is getting incorporated into some of these businesses. And so, for example, I have another company this year, I haven't talked to Milan about, but pretty excited about how they're using AI, so technology and some of the latest technology to introduce tools that have this social implications. So, for example, this company their goal is to bring information to small farmers in depressed and growing economies around the world. And so they believe, and they're developing models now on how you use generative AI to create these apps that will live on their phones for these farmers to help them with everything from determining what kind of seeds to plant or to deal with some climate change issues. It's pretty exciting to see how some of that, information that is held perhaps in different areas can easily end up in a very, approachable way on someone's phone, regardless of where they are.
Great.
In terms of trends, I think one trend that we talked about here that we're seeing a lot is focus on impact measurement and KPIs. So more and more companies are actually introducing or are mandated to introduce these metrics. So I think that's definitely a big trend that's very encouraging for social companies like mine. There's also a sharper focus on the so-called UN development goals. And, those goals are now, like in many mission statements, and, like companies are really paying attention to how their effort, positively or negatively impact these goals. And then another trend that I'm seeing is really supporting these two first topics, access to finance. And I think there's a realization that, access to finance generally has been difficult, and that traditional VCs are not necessarily well suited to like help social entrepreneurship. And so you're seeing, at least in the United States, a lot of funds that are popping up that are, impact funds or, like social entrepreneurship funds. There are a lot of grants out there. There are a lot of foundations that are giving. So you're seeing like a vast array of, like financial offering to support the growth of social entrepreneurship, to make sure that companies can really help reaching those goals that we're so far behind on.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. As we've finished this session, I would like to thank my colleagues, Patagonia faculty colleagues, and now we open the floor to other comments and questions that can come from the floor. Here I have some of that. I can readdress to some of you. For example, the first one is, I think, for both of you, if there's any reshaping rule that social entrepreneurship can have in some areas, some world areas, such as India, for example. Exactly, the question is, how can social entrepreneurship play a pivot role in reshaping the future of rural areas? For example, and this is, I think, mainly for Susan, if you have any ideas about what is happening in India, if you have experiences in this case.
Yes, I mean, I think, I know we've talked about, a lot about Africa and some of the companies there, but certainly India, we see a fair amount, if not equally so, initiatives for countries like this. And I can tell you, talking specifics in terms of companies that I have worked with, and particularly for women, for example, one of the issues regarding menstrual concerns and how to help some of the poor areas in India with some of the information and knowledge that gets shared, as well as some of the products. And so we have worked with some of those companies who are designing products and reaching out to parts of India to help those, and I say women, those girls that a lot of times are still, trying to deal with some of the shame that's associated with menstrual issues. So that's just one the I'm trying to think. We had another company that's doing a lot more on the the transportation side in India, and thinking about more innovative ways, again, to get folks, whether it's still by bikes or scooters, but, more efficient ways to get folks around a city. So that was a couple of my examples. I don't know if you have any thoughts on India.
Yeah, I mean, as an African, I think in our rural areas we have similar challenges. I think the top challenge is really around access. So some of the services that you see in urban centers are not readily available in rural areas. And so a lot of the technology that is being deployed in Africa and in India is around, like Susan was saying, like how do you provide access to information? So one of the things that we do have in rural areas is, like cell phones and smartphones. So you're seeing a lot of analytics companies that are helping farmers, like better understand, like seasons, and so that they can, generate like more yields. In terms of access to like healthcare, we're seeing a lot of startups here at MIT that are doing televised digital sort of like healthcare, so that you don't necessarily have to travel all the way to the city to get, some advice on, like whether you might be having X disease versus Y. And so a lot of it is around like access, but again, not so much of an expert in the field, but that's where I've been seeing efforts being made.
Christina is asking if it is a challenge to collect data in rural areas. So that means that it's very difficult to measure the value you are creating for a community that you are trying to diffuse, is it? The question is for Milan, of course.
Yeah. So and again, so because it's hard for them to measure data, like one of the things that like around access is how can you bring some data intelligence to these communities so that they can make better decisions. And with technology, obviously that becomes easier. Whether it's like, okay, like your soil is at like X level of like moisture, and if you get to that particular threshold, and now it's the time to harvest, things like this. We're seeing a lot of farmers in India and Africa being helped with like the provision of some data analytics tools. So I think the question is spot on.
Thanks a lot. And my personal curiosity, as we are also going in deep with national culture, do you think that, both of you, of course, do you think that national culture, and particularly African ones, I actually don't know, are obstacles so they can facilitate in some way this kind of entrepreneurship?
That's a very interesting question. So I think culture definitely plays a role. And obviously in the context of Africa, you're seeing different patterns in terms of entrepreneurship, depending on, what was the general culture as it relates to colonizations, for instance. So in Africa, there's a very clear divide between, like Anglophone countries and Francophone countries. You're seeing that Anglophone countries tend to be a lot more entrepreneurial. And, I'm actually a political scientist. So, this is the little political scientist in me. I think what you're seeing are patterns around, like trade. The British were, like a lot more interested in commerce. They settled around, coastal areas, and, like the people that were living under colonial rule, be it in India or countries like Nigeria, very quickly were introduced to trading. And I think some of these, characteristics have remained and are very pervasive, whereas countries that tended to be colonized by France, for instance, maybe spent, like a little bit more time, thinking about poetry and culture, like to make like a very broad like statement around it. But so I think you're seeing sort of like these double speed, whereas, countries like Kenya and Nigeria that were, colonized by Great Britain, like are a lot more, like leaning into this Anglo-Saxon, British American way of entrepreneurship versus, like some of the European, colonized countries are a little more slow to adapt, like to this shift. I mean, I certainly see it in my country. We're colonized by Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
And Susan, do you have an idea about that?
Yes. So sorry, my computer died. But anyway, so just briefly, I do think, as we've touched upon, there is a fair amount of attention given to entrepreneurship around the world. And I think in their own way, many of these countries are just figuring out how to support entrepreneurship within their cultures. And I would have to say, even as an example, if I think maybe even 10 years ago, if you look at China, there was a lot of questions about, their level of entrepreneurship, and is this something, given their culture, that they would ever be successful in. And I feel like we've seen some tremendous progress coming out of China in terms of the support, when you talk about obviously a different type of government, but in the support that they started to give startups, and whether that be money or knowledge or facilities. I worked closely with a Chinese entrepreneur. And so I think, it can be done. I think, because cultures, they certainly play an important factor, but it does need to, I think it has to involve the government at the highest level in terms of supporting sort of this innovation. And at least we have some really great examples of how innovation can help some of these economies. And so I think it's just whether, they can do it quickly, I'm not so sure, but I think there definitely is more of a focus and intention to think about how to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship in these countries.
Innovation-driven entrepreneurship. So then we have one more question by Andrea, who is asking, the question is for Milan, if he's reshaping his business model to be, in order to be much more profitable than social oriented, because of your results, your figures. Is it?
So there's certainly some adjustments that we've made along the way, where we might have started with some areas where we were a lot more idealistic than like was actually required to be successful, and we've made some like trade-offs. I think some of you spoke about like Patagonia making some compromises, like the narrative, like versus the need for profit. So I think that you need to look at these trade-offs and what keeps the boat moving forward without like compromising too much on the biggest mission. So there's always this tension of focusing on your North Star and your why, while also making sure that like the boat can keep moving forward. But keeping a balance is important. Again, I think that they can like be somewhat aligned, so that you can maximize both.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm not sure if there are any other questions, as we have 1 minute more. No one? Okay. Okay, I would like just to thank both of you for your very interesting presentation, and for the answer you gave that were much more interesting than the presentation, as they touched some problems that we have in our hearts and we have in our mind, of course. Of course, looking at this process by my side, I can say that it is something that is growing and growing even in Europe. When you Milan were talking about differences between French culture and English one about colonization, well, I can say that mainly Europe is much more linked to what state is doing. So we are waiting for the state. So that's why it is inhibiting the entrepreneurship. And it is something that you can see in the culture of colonialism in Africa, but we can actually touch in Europe, in our process in our growing entrepreneurial process. And it is something that is happening even in social entrepreneurship, as very often social firms, they are just substituting what state has no money to do yet, because we have problems because of budget and so on. So that's why mainly this social entrepreneurship is growing and growing in Europe. And on the other side, as I told you, we have the fact that on the other side, consumers, they are growing their consciousness about what social means and the effect. And it is something that is becoming very important in Europe. Well, if you have to summarize, I would like to thank Susan, because she showed us what Martin Trust is doing, has done in the past, and is doing in the future, and now it is meeting the different entrepreneurs wherever in the world, as MIT has done all over in the past. And I would like to thank Milan, because he presented at a very particular experiment, very particular firms that can be I can say copied somewhere else, as it is something that the big why you were talking about is something that is existing also in other parts of the world. We have studied also some experiments even in South America about small farmer and social agriculture. And the other point we touched was the point, the argument about community, as the value is not something that is relevant just for the entrepreneurs, but also for the community he has around. And the shared community, the shared value, the idea that the value can be shared through the community is something that we can't measure using figures, but you can measure in your everyday life because of your relations, your friends, all the relation you have in your business. So what is very interesting for me is the idea that we can and we should work about a different way of measuring value. This shared value is not measured by figures, but also by something else. And other elements to measure this value should be improved. You were talking about tax reduction or facilities that you can have by state or government. Well, this is one way, but there are some others we should improve. And what else? It is very interesting for us. It was, I think, very interesting for our colleagues that were looking at this interesting talk. I would like to thank you and my colleagues and all the people that were listening to us. And I give you the appointment to the next global expert talk that we'll have next month again with MIT colleagues. Thanks again, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Enjoy.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Take care.